Hello.
Yeah, that's your name.
Squirrels got me.
Big Jim.
Yeah.
Really cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
Cold and fun.
That's good that you think that of it, because that's what deer hunting typically is cold and fun.
Yesterday morning, I'm glassing up on the pass, and I see these deer moving, and I'm like, ooh, there's some deer moving. All of a sudden, I just see this person just head down, just hauling ass, wearing shorts and a t-shirt with a pack on. And I'm like, is that Tard? My dad always talks about floating through the woods like the autumn breeze.
So Robert's
when you're
the
275 pounds, I don't know how you do that, but
the Freightliner. It's just like a creeper. You're just kind of up in the corner watching what's going on down there.
Yeah.
You know.
He's like,
he's up there slapping, pissing all over everything.
is it warm yet?
How did you know the name of the actor?
That's right. I know.
How did you say his name?
Hervé Villechaize.
You know what pert near means.
If you know what pert near means and you live in America, you're a redneck too.
Welcome to the Log Talk Podcast, brought to you by Pert Near Outdoors. Hey everybody, welcome to this week's episode. This is your host Billy, and it is episode 42 coming at you. This one is going to be some whitetail talk, as we're going to kind of start shifting gears a little bit here. We've been talking quite a bit this spring about fishing, we're going to still keep some fishing stuff in there, maybe get into some bass and walleye stuff with some people that are in tune with that around the state. But we've been talking a lot about turkey, so we're going to start kind of shifting gears a little bit back towards whitetail as we get into the summer and we start trying to plan for our fall season, as well as some talk about some Western stuff and gear and things like that. Although we're not going on a trip, we know a lot of people who are, and it's always good to talk about some of the things that we've learned and some of our experience, as well as others who have that as well. So this week we are talking whitetails, and I'm joined by Dallas Kirsch, and Dallas has been on before many times, and him and I kind of dive into what's going on with us here, with our hunting group and the land we're hunting. So we kind of get into several different topics, but primarily focusing on chatting about trail cameras and our trail camera strategy this year, which is going to be a little bit different than the past. We get into food plots. We get into spring scouting. We are kind of in a different position this year, so the food plot and land discussion is an interesting one that will be fun to follow along with. So I'll leave that for our discussion here tonight, today, tomorrow, this morning, whatever time you're listening to this, but I'll let you listen to that. I think it'll be intriguing and interesting for those to follow along with, as we're kind of on a new path ourselves. So that's what's coming up this week on the podcast. Dallas and I are headed down to Pennsylvania actually this Tuesday to meet up with Steve Shirk from Shirk's Guide Service. And Steve is somebody who's pretty successful in the PA mountains, and he also is an outfitter guide that takes hunters out and puts them on big bucks. And so Dallas put me on to him and was talking about some of the things he'd heard from Steve, following him on, listening to him on some podcasts. I think he's been on Trail Cam Radio before, and he also posts quite a bit of stuff on Facebook and Instagram. So I started following him and instantly wanted to know more about what his strategy was, and saw that he was doing some workshops. So Dallas and I reached out, so we are headed down Tuesday to do a workshop with him, learn a little bit about what he does, and then probably sit down for a podcast. So that'll be coming up here in the next couple of weeks. You'll hear from Dallas and I and Steve as we chat about our experience doing a field day with him, and some of the stuff we learned from being out there in the woods scouting around. If you've been following along with the Turkey Challenge, we are into the last week of the season now here in New York. So we are down to the wire. And this past week, things did seem to turn on a little bit with some good gobblers hitting the ground. In particular, my Uncle Chris, he shot a really good bird, his best spurred bird ever. So this bird had 1 3/8 spurs, and so he is now sitting at the top of the leaderboard for the top spur in our contest, and that leaves Tim Harvey, my other uncle, Chris's brother. He is sitting in first place with the top bird, and we still have Dalton Morgan in first place for the top youth bird, and we've got Alex, God darn it, what's her last name? It's escaping me, and here I am on the spot. Alex is still, forgive me, Alex, you are still in first place for the longest bird, so that's a fun little contest. She's sitting in first place there. So Turkey Challenge has been awesome. We got 1 week left. I certainly made an effort at it today and swung and miss. If you were following on our Instagram story, you would have seen I had a picture of a bird. I went after him about an hour later. After I got Bill Dan situated with the in-laws, I ran out, hit the call. He gobbled, came right in, gave me quite the show for about a half an hour, just gobbling his head off. Couldn't really see him with all the underbrush, but he was right out there in front of me, 60, 70 yards, somewhere in there. And he finally started getting, kind of probably getting impatient because he had gobbled so much. He was probably up in the 30 gobble range. It was quite insane. It was like every minute or less he was gobbling. It was pretty amazing to listen to. But he finally committed and came to my left in an area where I really did not have much shooting, and I had one small shooting lane. And after holding my gun up for probably 20 minutes or so in a very awkward position, I finally had the opportunity, and I missed. So he lived to fly another day. I watched him jump up in the air as I had tears running down my face because I punched myself in the nose, and just another classic Slick Willie moment out in the woods. So had a fun morning there. If you were following along, I'm sure you enjoyed that as well. And this past week, if you've been following us too, had a chance to get out and do some spring fishing out on Lake Erie, targeting not walleye. We're thinking about walleye, but we don't know what the hell we're doing with that. So my brother-in-law Donnie and I, we focused on bass, being that's what I've mostly gone after out on Lake Erie. So we headed out, and with some tips from a friend of mine, Paul Shermer, who is a guide or charter captain. He hits up both Lake Erie, the river as well as Lake Ontario. But Paul kind of gave me some tips where to go, and we were able to get onto some fish. Donnie had a nice day, and I caught one myself. So a little slow, a little slower than we expected or we hoped, but it was a good day to be on the water anyway this past Thursday. So everything's going great around here. Having 2 kids is just a joy, and we're definitely lacking on the sleep end here, my wife and I, but everything's going well. So we looking forward to this upcoming week's adventures and getting out and tearing it up. So thanks for listening. Appreciate it. Hope you all are checking out the Breeding Radio series. It's been fun. If you haven't, recommend you go back and check that out. And I hope everybody's staying healthy as well and getting back to work soon. So thank you again. We will talk to you all next week. And just remember to keep fading them. Hi, Dallas. All right. We're going to pretend that this is the first time we've talked about this stuff because the batteries just died on my recorder. So Dallas, Kirsch, and myself. So everybody who's been following on with the podcast for the last 7-8 months, whatever it's been, you've heard Dallas's voice before. He is my wife's cousin and one of my hunting buddies. So Dallas and I have been chatting about wanting to get together and kind of just talk about just kind of all the stuff that's been going on of late, deer hunting wise, and our preparation for the upcoming season. And I guess the 3 main points that we wanted to cover on today's conversation was just some of the land changes that are going on with us, and what those impacts have been, or what we foresee the impacts potentially being, as well as what we've been doing scouting this spring, especially with the time that me personally I've had, because I've been out of work quite a bit with this whole coronavirus deal. Dallas has still been working, but we've still been getting over there to the farm quite a bit, late winter and all spring. And then also chat about trail camera setups and things like that, as we're starting to dabble a little bit more in having an actual trail camera like game plan as a group. And then we've also gotten some questions from people about different camera setups as far as brands and going cell phone or going with what we went with the Cuddy Link for the farm. So we'll kind of get into a little bit of that and then kind of see where we're at time wise. So Dallas, we already kind of chewed the fat a little bit, but if you want to kind of run through the what has changed with the property effective the first of the year with the sale of the farm and kind of what we're looking at here as we move forward with kind of not a new setup, it's still the same land, same people hunting it, but we've got a little bit of different scenario going on there with those changes.
Yeah. So my dad and your father-in-law, Dan, have owned the farm for, most of their lives, and they decided to retire at the end of last year. So the buildings and about 140 acres of tillable on the one side of the road were sold to Bob and Dan's cousin, another family that we're fairly close with. So they're going to come in and run that as a part of their big dairy farm operation out of Sheldon. So they'll just be running the land and using the buildings for some storage and whatnot. For us, it shouldn't change a ton because we're still going to have access to the property. Well, we still own all the hunting property that we did before. We just lost some tillable, but even that is not really going to stop us from access or anything, being that it's owned by family or friends. So the crop rotation is going to change a little bit, being that they're going to farm it for dairy as opposed to cash crops. So you'll have probably mostly corn and alfalfa, and they'll take like 4 cuttings of alfalfa off every year as opposed to what we were doing before, which was 2 cuttings of just tall grass. That was not that the animals, the deer and turkeys and whatnot, didn't eat that, but they didn't like it as much as what they'll like having with more alfalfa and stuff like that being grown. So then a lot of the corn will be chopped off in September as opposed to being left to dry out and then combine in October or November, which is, the combining was nice for it being left for grain because that left a lot of feed behind.
Right.
But when they come in and chop the corn, though, they'll plant a cover crop over that, and that'll be a nice winter feed for the deer too. So it'll be a change that might be for the good too.
Yeah, I'm pretty interested to see what it's going to look like, just because it's, number one, those hedgerows being gone. I was interested to see how that was going to affect turkey hunting, and being that this is kind of our first season to see how it affects the way we normally see game move. And the turkeys really hasn't changed their patterns at all, which is very encouraging. And if anything else, it's given us a new access point because they put a very nice road in to get to those fields where they took those hedgerows out, so their trucks can drive down that to dump the combines and, just have a nice big turnaround. So now we've got this nice road we can access that end of the property on, and it just makes everything, in a way, it'll be interesting to see how the deer handle it, but the turkeys, it hasn't affected at all. So if we kind of take a look at that, and I guess deer activity wise, I spent quite a bit of time over the last 2 weeks with turkey season, with the week before turkey, and then now since season opened, getting over there in the morning and getting over there in the evening and watching the deer from that spot now. Like, it's an absolutely awesome spot to get into for the last hour of light, and you can sit there up against that hedgerow that's still there, and you're 400, 500 yards away from where the animals are, and they don't have a clue you're there, and they're just going about their business. So it almost kind of opened it up in a way that we can look into the property that we could kind of before, but I don't know, I never did it. I never accessed anything that way prior to them taking that hedgerow out and putting that road in. So it'll be interesting. And then having that, like I think you were saying, I don't know if you mentioned it just now, but I don't think you did, but they're going to go primarily all corn in all of those fields, whereas there was always some soybeans, some corn, as well as some hay or grass just for them, for Bob and Dan were harvesting that. So there's going to be a totally different food source there this year, at least to start. Like you said, they're going to have a cover crop after they take that corn off early, but that's going to be super interesting to see. We're not going to be able to see shit once the corn gets up. We might be able to see into the hardwoods a little bit from that glassing point, but it's going to be different.
Yeah, and that's part of the reason we hung that tree stand too. It's going to be right at the end of that road that they're putting in. So if the corn gets too tall for summer scouting, we're going to be able to just go to the end of that road, climb up in that tree stand. The only thing we're going to have to watch is wind direction on that. We got to have like a south wind for that.
Yeah.
Because the west will be blowing right in towards where the deer are. But in the long term, that'll be you've already been taking advantage of it as a really nice glassing point right there where, I mean, you can pretty much just glass right out of your truck if you want to.
Yeah. If the weather was bad a couple nights, I just pulled the truck down to the, point where I could just barely see over the rise, and I wasn't exposing the entire truck, so it wasn't sitting there wide open. And yeah, I mean, you just mount the spotting scope on the window and have a riot. But what was I going to say? What was interesting sitting there and glassing from that spot those evenings and those mornings, primarily the evenings. The mornings I didn't really see much for deer activity. A little bit over by the second pond and up to the front food plot, but in the evenings we've had a lot of east winds over the last couple weeks, and on the evenings when we had kind of our consistent south, southwest, northwest winds, that's when I was seeing all the deer. I wasn't seeing hardly any deer on the evenings when we had east winds. So it was kind of interesting to sit there, and I know I've heard it brought up on a few podcasts recently that this time of year, turkey hunting is a great time to get out and deer scout, watch what the deer are doing, because they're in a lot of their similar traveling patterns as they will be in October right now, because there isn't a lot of, there isn't crops growing, there isn't food for them that they're normally going to have in their summer pattern. And they're kind of in a lot of that, eating browse and eating some, cut, some corn, like they're still hitting the cornfields a little bit and eating some stuff that's still on the ground there. So interesting. I think it's something that I'm noting as I'm seeing it, that they're not on that end of the woods when the wind is not coming out of the prevailing, westerly side of things.
Yeah, see, this is going to be a spring like no other up there as far as food, though, because what they did is they killed off all that. Like any place that had grass in the fields, they killed that in the fall, and then they spread manure on it this spring. So they pretty much took and wiped out all food that was available except for corn stubble. So, next spring you'll still have a cover crop growing there. So that'll actually be the first thing that's up and green in the spring, because it never really goes away. It keeps growing throughout the winter.
Yeah,
it holds nutrition through the winter. So next year, when you look at that side of the property, it's going to be totally different, because the whole thing's going to be green, whereas now it's shit brown.
Yeah.
And there's piles of dirt everywhere from all the work they've been doing. They're putting tie lines in, they're digging ditches. So
yeah, it's
like a construction zone there now, whereas next spring it should be like just prime feeding.
Yeah, full of life for everything.
You should see a ton of life out there next year. And going forward. So you'll pretty much, whatever you notice this spring, just pretty much it's I don't think you'll see the same type of pattern.
So are you saying I'm wasting my time, Dallas? Or are you just saying don't spend a ton of time taking notes and, writing blogs and whatever?
Do you have a blog?
No, I don't have a blog. Danny wants to blog. Does that surprise you?
I didn't know that was still a thing.
For housewives and accountants, yes, that's what blogs are still relevant in that world, apparently.
All right.
But
we have one accountant on our team. It's always good to have one of those.
It is. He always he's very slow, and I think that's that's a characteristic of an accountant. He's very analytical. He thinks about things. He doesn't like to get too excited, whereas the majority of us, we get really excited about stuff, and we're like, yeah, we're going to go cut like 25 of those trees down, or we're going to go do whatever. Like, Danny's always kind of like, I'm not quite sure.
Yeah. Should we address the whole why everybody calls him Danny?
Danny, yeah, I think we should.
So I actually got that from Caddyshack. Judge Smales says that to Danny Noonan. Right. Danny. So I started saying that to him. And then when I did that, we all realized that it sounded like his dad more than it did Judge Smales.
Right.
So I think that's where everybody assumes that comes from his dad's voice now. But
and then I think that rolled off into me saying Dallas. Like I don't know. We just say each other's names the way that we do. And I guess when you spend as much time together and you throw some alcohol into it, nicknames tend to be generated and they tend to stick if they're worth a damn. So yeah, Danny boy, what do you say, Danny? He's a chicken farmer now. Do you know that? He's breeding.
No,
Yeah, he's breeding chickens, man. He's not physically breeding them. I think they're breeding each other. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, what happens up there on whatever the hell that back ass road is he lives on with no outlet? God only knows.
Yeah.
So focus back on the, getting us back on course here. So we kind of covered the land changes. It's interesting. It's fun because we've had time. I think the number one thing is like that's kind of rolling into the scouting we were talking about, glassing and looking at stuff and trying to figure out what's been going on. This spring, I guess really starting, I got out a little bit in February around here, but really in March when this whole lockdown and everything happened, I got out a lot, hiking and shed hunting. So as well as Brian did, Brian got out quite a bit, and you actually were hitting the ground quite a bit in the mornings and the afternoons too when you had an opportunity around your work and family schedule. And so we've kind of started to really look at obviously you guys have been hunting this ground your entire life, but looking in a lot of different areas and spending a lot of time and using technology in OnX primarily to really start plotting out where are these main destination sign points throughout the property and trying to figure out how we can attack these areas where we know that there's good sign. You guys have historically seen good deer movement in these areas, but maybe have never attacked these these certain spots to try to get into and kill and use that. So, I guess what's your thoughts on what we've been doing this spring scouting wise and what we've seen and what we've found?
Well, obviously we've done more spring scouting than we normally would because of the time that we've had. I mean, I'm still on a normal schedule, but at the same time, I can't go and do a lot of the things that I normally would.
Right.
My daughter's birthday was Saturday. We didn't have a party for her, so I mean, we were still out this weekend playing around outside.
We had a party. I'm sure she had a great birthday weekend. We were ripping four-wheelers, and those girls were smiling. I have seen your girl smile. They're always pretty damn happy. But man, watching Emma ride that four-wheeler was the highlight of my month. Like that four-wheeler is gigantic, and that huge cargo box behind her, and she's just a little bicycle helmet on, just all revved up. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I don't know if the three of them have ever had so much fun for an afternoon as they did on Sunday. That was a blast riding four-wheelers around up there. So Brian's got some new wheelers, and we got the two old Hondas. Those Hondas are nice because you can just stick them in second gear, and they can start and stop with that, and they go pretty good, but they limit how fast you can really get going. So
when we were doing hot laps back and forth across the ranch, and Emma had that thing pinned, and it was over revving. You could hear that thing. She had that thing going as fast as you possibly could in second gear and was asking for more, and she wasn't getting it. And I look at Sarah, and I'm like, that didn't sound good. And Sarah's like, why? I'm like, because that thing is way over revved for second gear right now. But
I think it was in first at first. I think it was, I added a gear to it.
Yeah.
So it was probably still the same. So I don't know. Those things might go out in a blaze of glory now because, of course, they want to go every day now. But like I told them, I said, once they get crops planted over there, we're not going to be able to just go anywhere we want to. So I said, let's just go now and get it out of our systems and ram around those old cut soybean fields where everything's dead and dry. So,
right.
As far as scouting though, I think that
there again,
that's all right. Spring scouting, I do think, is one of the most important things you can do because it's low impact relatively. As far as, I mean, you still, there's a limit to it because you're still pushing deer around and stuff like that, but at least it's not anywhere near deer season where, you'll still give things a chance to settle down. But it's nice to get up in there because it's so easy to see everything that happened the previous year. And you have to take it with a grain of salt because I think a lot of the trails and sign you're seeing is just winter bed to feed type sign. But when you see those rubs and scrapes, and especially we found a handful of really good buck beds, I think those things tell a better story of really what was going on in the previous hunting season. And I think you can learn a lot from that. And it's easy to do, because you can see a ways and you kind of just, I mean, I've heard you allude to it quite a few times. You kind of just grab a deer trail and just start following it and see where it takes you.
Mm-hmm.
It's either going to take you to feed or bedding, or it's going to take you through a lot of scrapes that you wouldn't normally see. And that's the thing, in the fall, we have to be careful. I know sometimes it probably seems like we're overly cautious about where we go on that property, but you got to remember that you got like 5 of us trying to hunt there. So if everybody just wants to like hunt till 9 o'clock in the morning and then go scouting and take a couple laps around the woods, and you think, well, that was fairly low impact, but then the next guy does the same thing, and so on and so on. Next thing you know, it's like, man, we haven't seen a deer in 10 days here. So that was actually a strategy we really started to implement about 10 years ago or so, was just to try to have our spots where we hunt that were lower impact and just try to basically sit the edges and wait them out. And sometimes it gets a little old, but it's proven to work for us. I mean, we've killed a lot of deer and a lot of good bucks off of that property. So I think the best time to do the scouting is now. And obviously that tells you what happened last year. It's not telling you what's current. So there's some of both that you need to do, but there's a lot that can be learned now when it's a lot easier to do that sort of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess I've never asked you this, but I'm just curious. So, I mean, we're like this spring, you and I in particular, are walking around and we were actively trying to find buck beds. And you and I both like to listen, we listen to a lot of the same podcasts and a lot of the same guys that are really aggressive on hunting buck beds, and we both find that pretty interesting. And we've kind of taken that on as something we're actively trying to find those ideal bedding areas for bucks in particular. And so what's that been like this spring for you? Because you've found a couple. I found the one on the other side of the road that's clearly a very heavily used bed. And just kind of I'm interested in your perspective on that, based on the fact that you've been hunting there your entire hunting life, so 20 years probably at this point. What's that? What are you seeing? What are your thoughts on that? Being that you're seeing these spots where these deer are bedding, is that resonating with you or what?
Yeah, we've talked about bedding. I mean, we've always talked about bedding as far as trying to avoid it, and try to keep it low as far as, stay away from those areas so you're not chasing too many deer around, pressuring too many deer while you're trying to hunt and whatnot. And my thought was always bedding is everywhere on that property because it's fairly thick. It's mixed hardwoods. It's a nice mix of hardwoods that's been logged over the years, and there's good cover pretty much everywhere you go. So you kick deer out of everywhere you go. But I think the difference is you can go anywhere and kick a doe out of there. And you do have to be careful because you don't want to be chasing all your does around either. But if you do it in the spring like we've been, where we've found a handful of beds that were clearly worn in, all the surrounding sign shows that a buck has been bedding there. And you don't know which one necessarily, but like the one that I found that had the big rub right near it. And we had the pictures of those 3 good bucks right there in January on that same trail. I'm assuming that at least one of those good mature bucks was using that bed the whole previous season in 2019. So when you find stuff like that, you can focus on that as being not a bedding area. I think when we talk a bedding area, you're more or less talking doe groups, because they can kind of go anywhere they want to, just as long as they've got some decent cover, but they also like to be somewhere where they can see. Because when you got 3, 4, 5, 6 does that bed together, what they'll do is bend an area in kind of a circle and have their eyes facing in all different directions. So they can use their eyes and ears more than they need to really use their nose, because it's strength in numbers. So they can see or hear you coming, or any type of predator coming. So they don't need to be set up in that wind-based bedding type of situation as much as a buck does. A buck needs to bed by himself, and typically he's going to be using the wind as his number one ally as far as his bedding spot. So he's going to get somewhere. What we've found is usually on the edge of cover is where we've been finding these beds.
Yeah.
So he'll have cover to his back, and the wind coming from somewhere that he's not looking. So he's using scent for, 50 to 75% of his surrounding area, and then he's using his eyes to cover the rest of what he can't smell. So those situations are fewer and far between, because they need to find a spot where they can reliably spend their days by themselves, as opposed to the does, where I think they can kind of just go anywhere they feel comfortable. But when a buck finds a place that he's felt comfortable with, he'll keep going there over and over and over again. And that's why you find these beds that are worn right in the way they are. And at the same time, I don't think the deer in this area, they're not so pressured that they have to go back to that one go-to spot every time. I think we pretty much know for a fact there's a circle that they're running, their home area. I mean, let's just take that split brow buck, for example, because that's kind of what we're all looking at. I'm assuming that we found one or two of his beds at least.
Yeah.
We know for a fact that he's not just going to those spots every day.
Right.
And you can tell that by the sightings, the trail camera pictures, the neighbors having seen him different places, different days. So he's making a circle throughout his home area, and he just knows he's probably got, I don't know, I'm going to guess 5 to 10 spots that he can reliably bed every day. And he may be even getting up and moving from one to the other during that late October, early November time period. Probably getting out, covering some ground, and then going back to a bed. But it's nice seeing some of these spots where, because when you find them, you go, okay, I see why he would be doing this.
Right.
And there's usually surrounding sign. There's usually going to be rubs right in the bed or right near it. And then you'll find scrapes right nearby too. So those are areas that I want to focus on a little bit more this fall with trail cameras.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that kind of brings us into the whole Cuddy Link conversation, because I think what we can do in October is start to move some of those cameras off of that summer food. When the soybeans and the corn start to turn in late September, early October, and the deer make their shift after they get hard horned, they're going to change their feeding and bedding patterns. So I think we can try to pick some of those areas that we think that we're going to see bucks bedding in, and either try to put some cameras right in the beds or right on trails directly leading to or from them, or on surrounding scrapes, and see what kind of action we get. And the nice thing is we won't have to go in and check those cameras constantly.
Right.
That's being the whole idea.
Yeah, no doubt. And talking to those beds and where we were finding them, what I took away from them is that, and I think you did too while we were looking at them together, is that most of them were also, they had all the favors as far as cover and wind and their ability to see, with those different winds, but they were all looking at one of our main access points to where our stands are. So that was a huge, I know I talked about on the podcast that I did with that guy, John Teeter, the Whitetail Landscapes guy. It was like a aha moment for me when we were walking through and finding, and you showed me where that bed was, and I was like, that lines right up with that big rub. And then we start lining up the scrape, we start marking these waypoints of these key sign points on the property, and you look at it, it's like, Jesus, this stuff lines, it's all in a line. You take the one main bed that we found on the west side of the property, and you take all the rubs and the scrapes, and they all line up with the other bed on the other side of the property. And they're both of those beds in particular are in spots that are watching spots where we drive four-wheelers in, where we walk in to access stands. So it made me kind of think a little bit about okay, how are we getting to those spots that we want to hunt on a west wind or on a southwest wind, or even some of our off wind stands? How are we getting there, and how, if there is a buck bedded in those spots, how would we approach those stands based on where we're finding those the beds and the sign to those beds?
Well, some of that goes back to the idea of the way we hunt the edges, so that you don't have to really get in the woods too far. When you have a west wind and we walk in from the north side of the property from the road, And you know that as soon as you enter the woods, there's going to be deer downwind of you, which is right where we found one of those buck beds, 75 yards off of that trail that we walk in on. Well, what's the best remedy for that deer not to smell you walking in that trail? Don't walk in that trail, you know? So that's why you see stand setups right on the edges near food, because we know that a lot of times they're not bedded more than 150 yards from that food. So a lot of times you can sit there in the afternoon and just wait them out. And the nice thing is too, when you go to get out of your stand, you don't have to go back through that same area. You can just get out and scoot out through the field. So some of what our access is tough. All the properties in farm country tend to have tough access because they're small, and they're usually, you only get access on one or two sides because somebody else's property is on the other side. So it's like your neighbors are having all the same issue with trying to come in from.
Yeah, everybody wants access to their neighbor's property so that they can get easier access to their tree stands, which is just not realistic. It's not going to happen, but
no, because you're going to trash your neighbor's property.
Right. Like, hey man, you should let me come in from over here. And it's like, well, yeah, but aren't you going to blow your wind all the way through my stuff? No, yeah, but no, I'm not. I wouldn't even. Yeah.
So as far as hunting, I think that you have to pick your spots. You're not gonna be able to totally win that battle. You're just gonna have to pick your spots for when it starts to get later in October and the bucks want to get up out of their bed a little sooner in the afternoon, and they're not just going straight to feed. On October 20th, I think you've got a better chance of sitting on that scrape that's 100 yards from a buck bed and having them get up out of there and come and check that in the afternoon, as opposed to just getting up and going straight out to the cornfield.
Yeah.
I think October 1st, you might just be better off sitting out on that field still, just waiting for them to come out and feed.
Mm-hmm.
You're only going to get to fire so many bullets as far as going into those places. But it also goes to what we've been talking about more mobile setups is, at least when you do go into those places, you can adjust your setup a little bit here and there. You don't have to go back to that same tree. You don't have to use that same access every time. They key in on that stuff. They know that you're doing intuitive. They know it intuitively. They don't look up there and say, oh, there's a tree stand and there's the access trail, but they figure it out. They just know how to skirt around that pressure.
Yeah.
So doing it a little bit different and not using the same setups all the time is another way to combat that.
Yep. This is all fun stuff to think about too, because it's, and now, like today I'm out turkey hunting up in the woods, and I'm seeing these deer trails, and one of the things that we identified this spring walking the hardwoods was seeing all of the really, really heavily traveled trails going north and south, going from food to food with bedding in between, and then finding a lot of that buck sign running parallel to those trails, crossing those trails. And a lot of the scrapes were at, near intersections or near edges where there was, like a couple of the spots where you and your dad went in and cut a bunch of trees down last year. That one, primary scrape, we set up right on that scrape this morning and had that long bird. He was a long bird, probably. He was the longbeard with the four hens. We were set up right. Scott Murray and I went out and we were sitting right by that scrape. It was all tore up with turkey sign, but seeing those perpendicular trails crossing, that's something else that I've heard talked about on podcasts, and then finally, like seeing it on the ground, it makes sense because those deer are, those bucks are trying to cross all of those doe trails, going from one side of the property to the other, and they can check a ton of does in a very short distance just by hitting all of those trails, crossing them, because there's a dozen different heavily used trails going across that really not that big a block of woods, but there's a lot of heavily traveled area through that small corridor.
Yeah, it's a key point that they don't necessarily have to cover a lot of ground to check a lot of does, and especially when there's a lot of does in the area. I mean, we're not overpopulated with them, but there's plenty there.
Yeah,
so they don't need to
Brian's helped us with that.
Yeah.
Freaking trigger.
been working on that for a long time.
Yeah. He was down this year. He didn't hit his numbers this past season. I'm worried about him.
No. I'm sure he'll be fine.
Yeah, it'll be all right. So we started talking about the trail cameras, and so I've been dabbling. I've always had a bunch of different stuff going on with the mishmash of cameras, different brands, and I'm always buying cameras that are on sale and getting a deal. But this past year, I started messing around with cell cams. Spy Point is a brand I'm using. The price was just right, and I bought one last fall in August and ran that the entire season. Was pretty happy with the performance of it. Not so much on the farm. We seem to have a bit of a Verizon 4G issue, getting good consistent signal everywhere out there in a wide open field, which I can't quite wrap my head around. It's quite frustrating, but I purchased another one of those cameras, and ironically they work great up at our camp in Naples in the middle of nowhere and in the hardwoods. So what you, me, and Brian jumped in on together was the CuddyLink system, and your dad too. So let's talk a little bit about what the CuddyLink system does and what we're trying to do with it, as you kind of already alluded to a little bit, but what this system could do for us as a group hunting a piece of property together. I think it's a pretty incredible tool.
Yeah. Yeah. So CuddyLink is it's a network of cameras that all links together via radio signal, and you can deploy now up to 24 cameras on one network. They'll all send their pictures back to a home camera, which then relays it cellular to an email or a text message. So you'll get all the pictures from all your cameras on a network sent to you directly from one camera. And you can do it depending on what kind of home setup you buy. Like the home camera we got is actually a camera that sends the pictures. But if you don't have a signal or you don't want to pay for that service, which is $15 a month, which to me is well worth it, you can get
4 cameras. That's a pretty good deal. You know, we have 4 right now, but if you had
for up to 24 cameras though, for $15 a month, then you might have to up it to $20. But I think that's the unlimited plan, $20 a month. So you can put all these cameras together. And then, like I said, you can get the home that's that you just go and collect the SD card from. So even if you do it that way, like if you don't have a cell signal and you have to go collect your card every now and then, you're still only going to one spot, and you can put that out in the outskirts where, you know, especially if it's not even a camera, you can just put it somewhere near the road where you can just pull up to with your truck, swap the card out, go home, put the card in your computer, go through all your photos. So it gives you just incredible accessibility as far as your cameras, where you're not going to, because that's the worst thing about cameras. I mean, there's a lot of down points to them, but by far the worst part is going out and intruding and leaving scent and going to swap those cards out. And especially, like, it's one thing if you got 1 or 2 cameras, but if you got 12 of them around a couple of properties, you're just constantly going in and out of there and just disrupting things. And then if you figure that with us, there's 3 of us that have cameras. Mm-hmm. So, you know, if Billy decides on a Tuesday night, he's got time to go check his cameras, he goes out and checks them. And then a week later, I'm like, well, I got some time and I haven't checked my cameras in 3 weeks. So I'm going out there checking mine, you know? So now we got multiple people going out there and checking their cameras.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, is that, you know, it's fun checking your trail cameras. So you end up catching yourself, especially when you have a lot of time on your hands, or you have, like my son, Billy, like he can't get enough of getting on the 4-wheeler and going for a ride. So like when that's your burning time doing that sort of stuff, like oh, I'll go check the trail cameras. Next thing you know, you're intruding in those areas way more than what you need to and what you probably should, especially when you get close to season. And I mean those. So what's the range? Because I feel like you daisy chain them together too, right? You can the way that CuddyLink system works, like you just need to have one camera within range, a certain range of your home camera, and then it kind of like strings out from there. So if you had a huge property, you could probably cover the whole damn thing,
Yeah.
with 24 cameras. But
You could theoretically cover hundreds of thousands of acres with them if you could get the signal. Now, so what it does is, they daisy chain together. So you really just need one camera that'll link to your home, and then one that'll link to that, and one that'll link to that. So they say in timber, they say you can get about a quarter to a third of a mile, but depending on hills and timber and stuff, you may get more or less. They say in wide open, they can go over a mile. They've tested them over a mile. But the nice thing is you can check the signal on them. So when you go to deploy your remote cameras, you say check signal, and it takes a 20, 30 seconds or whatever to give you a signal, but it actually gives you a number on a 1 in 100 scale. And then it tells you good or fair or poor, or nothing or whatever. So it tells you that you have a signal.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you just need to link your cameras together if that's what it takes. And you can also put repeaters in the system. So you can buy a repeater, or you can, if you have to in a pinch, you can use one of your cameras as a repeater, so that it'll just relay the photos from one camera to the next. The only thing is you can't use it as a camera if you're using it as a repeater, but in a pinch you could do that.
Right.
So if you really are trying to reach out there farther than what they're capable of, you just need to put a repeater in the system. And then they send you a report every day. The home camera sends you a report. It lists the home camera and all your remotes, and it tells you what the signal is between them. It tells you if the battery's okay. It tells you how many images have been taken, and it tells you how many days your batteries have been in there too. So you can actually tell how long you've been running those cameras. So if you start pushing, it's 12 AA's for the remote cameras, and then the home takes 6 D's. So you can at least get an idea of what your battery life is. And it's something you can track over time too. Obviously there's a lot of factors there, how many pictures it's taken and whatnot. But.
Right. On that report, does it tell us what the, I'm trying to find the report. Here it is. Does it tell you what your battery life is?
No, it just says good.
Yeah. So it just tells you if you got an issue or not.
Yeah. Now, if you go to the camera, you can do a battery test, and it'll actually give you a percentage or some kind of a scale. It'll tell you how good your batteries are. But on the report, it's just going to tell you that they're good, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now they've got a new update that we'll be getting here soon. I think I've got the firmware. I just need to load it, where now you're going to be able to adjust all your camera settings remotely from your phone or your laptop or whatever. So you can, if you want to change your flash or your any of your picture settings, like if you want to set up a 3-shot burst or whatever, you can do that now remotely too. So you don't need to go out there and press buttons on the camera. So they're making it so that once you get it set up and working correctly, really until your batteries die, you should be able to just roll with it.
Just leave it. And do we have ours set up, or do you have any of them set up with a multi-shot right now? Because we're getting those pictures sent to us, and so like today I walked by the camera in the front of the woods, on that right by the ladder stand there, and it only sent one picture. So I'm just curious if it's on a multi-shot or if it's just a single or what.
No, I didn't. If you go to multi-shot, it'll take the pictures and save them to the SD card, but it'll only send the first one to your email. So to me, that's kind of a waste.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not. I don't know.
I wouldn't say it's a waste, because then it's fun when you open up your so they probably do that so that you're not overusing your limit on the number of pictures you can transmit. But I would say when we get closer to season, it would be, because there's always shit. Like you get the first deer that runs by is a doe, and then right behind you get a buck, or, like in this situation, you get a coyote, a turkey runs by, and the next thing you know, there's a coyote behind it or something like that. It'd be interesting to see, get those multi-shots.
So there's the other settings as far as the delay for the pictures for the shutter. So a multi-shot is the signal goes off, the shutter opens, and then it takes, usually the cameras that I have, it takes 3 pictures, but on this you can set it to, I think, 2, 3, or 5. So what multi-shot is, it means that the shutter doesn't close, so it just bangs out those pictures right in a row, and on one signal, so that like you said, if there's a deer that's running by, or 3 deer that are running by, or especially like a buck chasing a doe, it'll get those extra pictures. Otherwise, the shutter closes every time, and then waits for another signal, and then opens up and take another picture. So there's shutter settings or delay settings on the camera. You can pick like 10, 15 seconds, 5 seconds. I think the default is 5. Well, I don't want a 5-second delay between every picture. So I set it to fast as possible is actually the other setting. And they're saying that's between 1 and 2 seconds. So for whatever reason, when you walked by, I mean, you were probably a little bit close to the camera, but I would have hoped that it would have snapped more than one picture of you walking by there. So the delay might be a little bit slow. So that might be something that we learn, is that we need to set up on air burst or whatever.
Yeah, I don't think I wasn't that close. I was out, I was walking on the trail, so I'm 15 yards away from that camera is any way it looks. But yeah, so far, I mean, we had a few issues in the beginning, not quite sure if it was taking pictures, and we've been kind of questioning ourselves because we've got, we haven't gotten any pictures of turkeys in areas where I was watching turkeys in the general area of the camera and trying to wrap my head around how we weren't getting any pictures of them. So, I think we're having fun. I guess this is kind of like what we're trying to do, but I think it's good advice for anybody is don't wait until, the week before deer season to start running your trail cameras and try to start figuring them out, because they're finicky. Like, that's the one thing that we've all taken away from trail cameras is that I don't care what brand you're using. I don't care whether you got a cell cam, whether you're doing something like we're doing with these Cuddy Links. Like, if it can go wrong, you will go wrong. You'll have a memory card that's shit. That's formatted wrong. You'll have batteries that are brand spanking new. It's like we are all fully committed on lithiums, and I would encourage everybody who is doing anything with anything outdoors. If you're going to have a headlamp, something as simple as a headlamp, put lithium batteries in it. If you're going to have your like we use the Garmin Rhinos, put lithium batteries in them. And then trail cameras. We've had cameras that aren't working, ready to throw them in the garbage, and you throw a set of lithiums in it just to double check, and all of a sudden everything works perfectly fine. And sometimes you get those, just regular alkaline batteries, and they're, for whatever reason, you got one bad battery in the bunch, and it just doesn't allow the flash to work properly, or the time's all jacked up, or just something's not working properly with the camera. So, I'd encourage everybody out there listening to this that it might, you look at those packs of batteries on the shelf and you're like, it's a lot of money to spend on 20 lithium batteries, but you probably aren't going to have to replace those batteries for an entire year compared to every 2 to 3 months, depending on how many pictures you're getting. You're going to have to be replacing those alkaline batteries. And in the long run, you're going to have less frustration, and you're going to spend less money if you put the money into those batteries up front. So, like just simple stuff like that. And you talked about also the updating the firmware. It's something that I've been doing, and, take a lesson from me that I accidentally, so I had 2 or 3 Stealth Cam of a certain model, and I went on the Stealth Cam's website, and just about every camera manufacturer, you can go on and actually download updated firmware. So if you've got a camera, God knows how long that camera sat in that package on the shelf at the big box store, and then you buy it, and then they've come out with several updates to the firmware of that camera to address issues or update things so they work better. Make sure those things are there, and it's great. And all you do is you download those little files, and you put them on your SD card, and you import, you put it in the camera, and you go through the steps depending on the brand of how to load that new firmware. But I'm a perfect example of someone who is a jackass, and I went on to Stealth Cam's website, and I accidentally downloaded the wrong firmware, and I flashed 3 of my cameras with the wrong firmware, and now they're completely unoperational. They won't even turn on. So I've got 3 cameras that were perfectly fine. There was nothing wrong with them, but I was like, ooh, I've got time. I'll update firmware. And then all of a sudden, now they won't even turn on. So
it must have been for a different version of Stealth Cam, right?
Completely different model. Yeah. So I screwed everything up with them. But it's something for people to be aware of. Sometimes you might say, wow, this it's junk. Try a set of lithium batteries, I would say be the first try. Try a new memory card that's formatted, blank, nothing on it. And then third would be to, go on the website of that camera manufacturer and see if they have updated firmware for that camera and try it out, because who knows, maybe it might be a fix, some kind of a patch for the issue that was causing you to have that problem with the camera. So it's a few things I've run across.
One more point on the firmware too is that if you go, so I bought the Cuddy Link package off of Sportsman's Guide, and different places, different websites, they all sell these 4-pack starter kits of Cuddy Link. So you get the home camera plus 3 remote cameras. And that seems to be the standard way that they sell it. So I buy it, and it comes in one big box, but there's a Cuddy Link box of kit, which is a home camera and 2 remote cameras, and then 1 more remote camera in a separate box. So they're packaging them as 3, but they're selling them the websites are selling them as 4. Well, what I found out too after I originally deployed those is that the 4th camera, the one that came by itself, had 1 version older of firmware. So now I was running a set that didn't have all the same firmware. So I think that's why we had some odd stuff going on in the beginning too.
Do you think that was the camera that was by the second pond?
Yeah, it was.
Okay, so maybe that's why it wasn't.
It still should have been taking and it was taking pictures. So I don't know. I think our only thing that's a little foggy with those yet is it seems like we're not sure how efficiently they're taking pictures as far as getting us triggered to take a picture. So we need to play around with that a little bit more. But again, that's why we bought them in March and not September or October, because right now those cameras would be just sitting out there doing nothing, because we'd be afraid to run out there and make the necessary adjustments to them. But another thing though is, I mean, I'm talking these up, but I'm not necessarily saying go out there and buy them yet, because we haven't totally ironed out the wrinkles and found that we for sure want to stick with them. But I'll say this though, the number one advantage of the Cuddy Link is that you don't have to go out there and continually check your cameras. The other thing is it tells you if there's a problem. So it's not just that the battery died or you lost your signal or whatever, the stuff it sends you in those reports. But if you mounted it on a tree and you get a windstorm and there's a branch in front of it and it gets you 60,000 pictures of a branch moving back and forth, you're going to know that day. So now you're going to be able to make a decision of, well, should I run out there and fix that? Or should I just let that branch flop around there for 3 months? Because that's the thing, like you set a camera and you're like, I'm not going to check that thing for, all summer or all the way until, next spring or whatever. And then you go out there and check it and the battery's dead, or the memory card filled up on one weed blowing back and forth in front of it, or it fell down.
Right.
You mounted it on a post and it fell over. These things can all be alleviated by the fact that you're getting pictures. Oh, and you can set the frequency for how often it sends you a picture too. So you can set it for every picture. You can do it by the hour, by 2 hours, whatever. You can even set it for a batch, so it'll only send it every time it gets 5 or 10 or 100 pictures. So part of the thing is it's going to tell you all the things that are going wrong. You're going to be able to know that from home without having to go out there and check that camera. So
yeah,
I think the potential advantages are just astronomical.
Yeah, and everybody who's listening to this has gone to check a trail camera and you're all fired up to pull it because you let it soak all season, and you go to grab it and it took pictures for 2 weeks and it stopped working. And it's so frustrating because you spend the money in the camera, you spend the money on batteries, you put the memory cards in them, and then you take the time to go put them up, and you have these expectations of what this piece of equipment's going to do or perform for you. I don't care what brand it is. I've tried them all. I haven't tried them all. I've tried probably 4 or 5 different camera brands, and a lot of them, they work great for a short period of time, and then all of a sudden you start having issues. But there's nothing worse than not knowing you have a problem until you go there to get the camera with an expectation of, okay, it's been taking pictures for the last 2 months during this period of time that I want to scope out what happens here. And I'm thinking of a perfect example of that public land I've been hunting the last couple of years, that I put a camera down in a nasty ravine creek bottom where there was one small pinch point where the deer had to travel, and I put that camera up like the last weekend of August, and that first like 3 weeks, it was about a month. It was like the month of September and like the first week of October, I was getting some awesome pictures. But I let that camera, I didn't want to go in there the entire season. So I went in there right around Christmas to pick that camera up. And sure as shit, that camera, when I got down to it, it's on a real steep side hill, and that camera had literally been bumped by a deer that ran by the camera because I had pictures of the deer hitting the camera, because it's such a steep spot with such a small little passing point that the deer actually ran by and hit the camera, and it spun the camera, and then the camera just didn't take any pictures, and then it was down there for 4 months with sub-zero temperatures, and the batteries died just because it was so damn cold. But that's what ended up happening, and I was so frustrated because I had pictures of, I wanted to see what happened in that area during the rut without going down in there. I've never been down in there during deer season. I just wanted to get a season's worth of information, and I failed to get that because my piece of equipment didn't perform the way I expected it to. So, thinking about what you're talking about and what that Cuddy Link system could do, not that I'm going to go spend, the $800 it costs to get fully set up with a 4-camera system on that, but that's like, it's like such a perfect situation for a Cuddy Link type of system where you can have a camera in an area that doesn't get a cell phone signal, that is communicating with another camera at the top of the hill, that would communicate with the next camera, and that would get it, whether it gets to a point where there is a cell phone signal or it gets it to a point where you can drive your vehicle or a four-wheeler or just walk to it and not bother that area that you're trying to hunt, that is your honey hole, or the maybe that one rut spot where deer have to cross here and this could be a dynamite spot. Like, I just think that would be an awesome scenario. I'm thinking of that spot in particular, to have a system like that where you just didn't have to go in there until you were ready to go hunt and try to make a kill.
Yeah. You mentioned too, your batteries dying in the cold. That's something, if people don't realize, that if you skimp on lithium batteries and you buy alkaline, it's not just that they won't last as long, but there's water in alkaline batteries. And you know what happens to water when it gets, really cold out? That's why you open up your battery box on a warm day in January when you walk out there to check your camera, and you're like, oh shit, this battery blew up and leaked acid all over. Well, it wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a bad battery. It's because the damn thing froze and cracked and leaked acid out all over the place. And now not only is your camera not working, but the battery box is full of acid, and you got to take it home and scrub it and hope it still works when you're done.
Right.
So there's more to the lithium than just spending a little extra money to make it last a little bit longer. I mean, you can actually do damage by not having it.
Yeah, and I never used, it's so funny too, because it's the stuff that I've picked up on since I've been hunting with you guys, and I never used lithiums. And the turning point for me using lithium batteries, Energizer lithium batteries, was when I bought a Rhino GPS, which is, for anybody that doesn't have one or hasn't used one, it's also got the 2-way radio capabilities, so you can see where the other people are in your party, regardless of what you're doing. But for us, we use it for hunting. And you guys all just, unless you have a rechargeable battery pack on the camera, which you have one and a couple of the other guys do, but if you've got, a radio, I think I said camera, but if you have a radio that has, the need to put actual AAA batteries or AA batteries in it, you just got to go lithium. I mean, and it's unbelievable how there's guys that will be running regular alkaline and they'll get sometimes not even a full day if we're talking a lot on those radios. And you could go, I went almost a whole trip in Colorado in an area where you don't have good GPS signal, satellite signal, so it's always searching. I went almost a full week. Brian and I, Bob, Danny, all of us, we were running the lithiums, and we went almost a full week on one battery set, which is just unheard of. And I think you get better performance out of the equipment anyway. You get better signal and better communication too, range-wise. So, huge proponent of the lithium side of things.
yeah, it's a little bit of extra money, but it's well worth it for what we're doing. I mean, why have a camera if you're not going to run it the right way?
Yep. And I'm just going to go back one more time to the memory cards too. Memory cards can be a big problem. And if you've got a memory card that's bad, it can cause a lot of frustration. So, a habit that we all have is after we, you do something a little bit different. I think you typically just keep like 2 memory cards for a camera and you swap them. Is that right?
That's what I'm going to start doing. In fact, I bought with the Cutting Link, I bought 8 new memory cards and I labeled them all for what camera it goes into. And because I had heard of that before, but I had, I was running all Moultries before, and I do like Moultrie trail cameras, but I never had any problems with the cards. And then I threw a Bushnell into the mix, and the Bushnell was doing all sorts of weird stuff. And I think it's because I was swapping I was just pulling cards out of one camera and clearing them and putting them into another one. And I think that the Bushnell got messed up by being in the Moultrie rotation. So now that's what I'm going to do just going forward. I'm just going to reformat all my cards or buy new ones, whatever. And I actually take a label maker and just make a small stick-on label that tells me what camera it's for. And you can just put Moultrie A or Moultrie camera 1, card A, and I have an A and a B and just swap them every time. And it's a little bit more, I suppose you'll have to have a little bit more cards, or you'll have to pay attention more to what you're doing, because before I just throw some empty cards in my backpack, and if I was out and I just needed one, I'd swap it. But the things, they don't weigh anything. They don't take up any space. So just try to have them with you if you think you're going to need them. And I also bought a set of those, the cases that the cards actually go into. So now instead of just throwing all my cards in a plastic bag or in my backpack, I mean, you got to remember those are electronic devices, so they can get corrupted by just being, they could get wet. They could get,
I did the same thing. I just bought one of those little plastic cases, and it's just like simple little shit, like $8 I spend for that, which is, I guess it's a lot of money for a little plastic case, but it's like now all my memory cards are just beautifully organized. And I would almost like to start doing what you're talking about doing too, where I've got cards for specific cameras, but I religiously just format them, and I haven't had too many issues with that. So after I pull the pictures off, I just format the cards, and that's my process. But I think it's even more foolproof to do what you're talking about, of just have a couple cards, because you're not going to need any more than 2, and for a single camera, and just to do a flopping cycle on them.
Yeah,
you're so smart, Dallas. That's why I appreciate you, Dallas.
We do learn a lot from each other. I mean, just having these conversations, you just bring up things that it's like, oh, why didn't I know that or think of that before,
Yeah.
And we listen to a lot of the same podcasts and different information too. We kind of follow a lot of the same people, and you hear some of the same things, but we've picked up on a lot of things just having these conversations, because you and I haven't known each other our whole lives, and we haven't hunted together our whole lives. So, I mean, you've talked about it a lot when you met us and started doing some of the things we were doing. It was like eye-opening, like, whoa, I've never seen that, or I've never knew about that kind of thing before, because you're like most people. You grew up in your hunting camp, hunting with your family and doing things the same way over and over, and that's fun. But when you go somewhere else and start hanging out with different people, you just see like all these different things that you just never had any idea about before. I mean,
and I
don't think you ever hunted public land before you came with me.
No, never. I would flip that around the same way. If you and Brian and your dad were to come hunt with my family, it's a totally different atmosphere. It's all big woods all the time, and it's just a different style of hunting. So it's like, I think it is, and it's good to have these conversations, because you can hear things over and over and over again, but you hear one thing, I hear another, and then we start talking about it, and we all pick up on these individual points, and then you can kind of start to put a plan together and, rationalize some of this stuff, and it just definitely helps, because at the end of the day, I want to be successful, and successful to me is is killing quality animals and killing animals. I want to fill the freezer. Number one, I mean, right now they're talking about meat shortage, and I've got several 100 pounds of meat in my freezer and had the best year of hunting I ever had. And thank God I did, because I don't have to worry about meat. It's like, that's my vision of success right now. Of course I want to shoot a big buck, but it's fun to have, like the relationship I have with you and Brian, and because you guys, me not being home, I have the same, my brother and I are the same way, but we're not close. We can't hunt together every day. We can't just go over to the farm or go to our camp and just go for a walk or go for a 4-wheeler ride like we used to. So it's nice having the relationship I have with you guys here, because I can do that, and I've got that sense of being part of something, but a brotherhood and everything else that goes along, which is important to me. That's what hunting is. It's like it's more than just going out there and killing for 3 months out of the year. It's like the whole process of trying to figure out what's going on and put it all together. It's fun. And Brian just admitted on the podcast that I was listening to, Jimmy interviewed him and AJ about their turkey kill on Sunday morning.
Oh, okay.
And Brian, I listened to this and I just sat down and I just looked at the wall, and I was like, I think I've been replaced. Brian's like, yeah, AJ and I would just make a real good team, and it seems like every time we hunt together, like stuff just happens, and I'm like, what the fuck? I'm like, that's me and you, Brian. Like, what happened? So Dallas, this is me saying, I think you and I are gonna me and you are gonna start being hunting buddies, and Brian can pound rocks because, I don't need his negativity. I can just, I can, me and you can go out and have the same adventures and maybe even have more success. So have that, Brian. Yep. You and AJ go have your love fest.
Yeah. Well, he tends to bring luck to anybody that he hunts with.
That's the part that he doesn't have. He doesn't see that. He doesn't. He's like, oh, wow, I go with AJ and I have a bunch of luck. It's like, dude, it doesn't matter who's with you or who you're with. Like, there's just animals running at you. That's what happens.
Well, I'm looking forward to listening to that. I mean, I heard the story from him already, but it's another wild AJ story where he just wakes up one day and says, I'm going to go turkey hunting, and ends up right in the middle of the action, right from the start. It's just like all our deer hunting adventures, but I guess he had a blast. So.
Oh, yeah, it's a good story. You'll enjoy it. It's freaking birds running at him. I mean, I've hunted turkeys. I don't know how many. I'm not that, I'm not like some huge avid turkey hunter, but like I've been in the woods a lot of mornings hunting turkeys, hoping for that gobbler to just come running at you. And these two son of a bitches go out together for one hunt, and by 6:01 they've got a bird running at them, gobbling, and asking to be shot. And it's like, and it's so funny. You'll hear it, but Jimmy, my brother's like, Jimmy's like, he's like, so was it still running at you? And Brian's like, yes. And AJ's like, no. It's like, I have a feeling AJ was just like, all he saw was just bird and gun and boom, I think is about what happened, but it's fantastic.
Well, me and you have had this conversation about how things change when you get more experience, and it's kind of like things slow down for you a little bit. You kind of process what's happening a little easier, and you can actually remember what happened and whatnot.
Yeah.
It's kind of like an athlete coming into a pro sport, and they say the game is going so fast that their head's spinning. And as they get a little more experience, things slow down, and they can, I feel like AJ's head's spinning a little bit. And I mean, it probably wasn't too long ago that you felt that way.
No, it still does in some situations, it's like, and you're 100% right. And I think AJ's he's different than I am. AJ's he doesn't get too high or too low. He's very even.
Yeah.
And that was the one thing Brian said, is that, you and I joke all the time about how excitable Brian is. And Brian, tells a story about, he shoots the bird, and like, the bird's flying when Brian shoots it, and it drops to the ground after AJ missed it. And you know, Brian's like, he's expected, like if it was me there with Brian or you, we'd be like Uncle Rick and we'd be like, whoa, we'd be screaming and we'd be high-fiving. And it's just, AJ's just like, like, wow,
Yeah.
that was awesome.
What just happened?
Yeah. And so, that's AJ. Like he doesn't get too high or too low. And I think he's just processing it all. Like it's really fun to see somebody going through that because everybody processes that stuff differently. And, I brought this up. I was on a guest on a podcast, on the Antler Up podcast. And I told we were talking about this past season. I told the story about the hunt I had where I shot the 2 does and buck this past year. And, I was telling those guys that, what I've learned from hunting with you and Brian and this whole gang out here is like, I just needed to learn how to kill deer. I didn't know how to kill. I thought I did, but I didn't. I was killing deer, but I wasn't a killer. And I needed to learn how to become that. And I feel like these last couple of years, just being around you guys and putting myself in better opportunities. Now I've missed my shots, in a couple of the last like 3 years ago. I've had a couple pretty good archery seasons in a row, but 3 years ago I had 2-3 seasons in a row where I was missing opportunities and I wasn't in that right mindset where I was ready to make those shots. I was blacking out and just all of a sudden the bow goes off and it's like, what happened? I missed, or I missed a couple bucks at the farm, or one buck in particular. I'm thinking I missed a buck and I just don't even remember what happened. Like it just all of a sudden, boom, the gun goes off or the bow goes off and you missed. Like it was a bad shot. And I feel more confident now where it's like, I've made those shots, whether it be on does or be on bucks. And it's like, now I feel like, I get to the point where that deer's in front of me. I'm ready to make that shot happen. I'm not even thinking about, where I'm aiming because you're starting to build that confidence behind it. And, I see that in you. Like, I watch, you're quite a few years ahead of me as far as your kids. You got 3 kids at home, so you don't have the time to get out that you probably want to, but you calculate it and I've only got so many days that I can hunt, and I'm going to save those days for when they're really going to count and when I know I'm going to have good opportunity. And that's been what's been so consistent about you over our friendship and me hunting with you guys is like, we get to the end of the season and you're not panicked. You're like, yeah, I know I'm going to go out. I got a week and a half left of season with rifle and then a couple days of muzzleloader, and I'm going to get a shot at a good buck. I know I am, and that's just confidence that you've built over the years just from killing and from learning how to hunt the season and not just hunt for the day.
Yeah, it's hunt smart, not hard. I mean, there's definitely something to be said about more time in the woods is being better, but the more time that you're out there, the more spots you're burning up. Would I rather burn up a spot on November 1st or, October 9th, or, I think everyone has their time of year that they're the best at getting it done for whatever, whether it's the type of property you hunt or the amount of time you have or the type of hunter that you are. I think, for me, it's pretty clear that the late season is the best for me. And especially if there's cold weather. I mean, if I could see the forecast ahead of time, I'd take all my time for that late season and just go out and hunt and try to kill a big buck, with a rifle or muzzleloader. And I mean, I love that time the most anyway, because that's when we go to PA and that's when we, when we doing our group hunting, like Letchworth and stuff like that. I mean, that's by far my favorite type of hunting anyways, because I'm doing it with the boys. Our group gets together and just, I mean, we have these epic hunts. Like, I swear every time we go somewhere, it's just like,
yeah,
you're driving home and you're thinking, man, if I ever had that much fun deer hunting, like,
I know. Yeah, it never fails. It really doesn't.
I wish we could just do that all year, honestly,
Yeah.
Then I'd probably, at some point, I'd probably be like, man, I'd like to just sit and go bow hunting or whatever. But I mean, that to me, that's the most fun. Just that, December is where it's at for me. And, most people wouldn't even care to go out hunting at all in December because they don't have that access to a good spot, or they just don't know how to do the type of hunting that we do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's good stuff. I
was going to say too, I think that one buck that you missed at the farm, it's okay. He ended up in the freezer anyways.
Which one was that?
I think the one I shot it with the muzzleloader late season one year. I think you
That I
figured
missed
you
out.
meant
That I
week
missed out back when I was in the poplar. That one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you guys were all in Pennsylvania, and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna go hunt the best stand on the property, and yeah, I missed them multiple times. But yeah, I didn't. Those things are burning me up, but they're, it's funny because I see AJ in his progression, and Brian and I and AJ talk about it quite a bit. That like he just needs to shoot, and you look back at like your childhood probably, and you're what, in your mid to late 30s, mid 30s?
38.
Yeah, so
I'll be 39 for this deer season. So
Jesus, so you're old. You look great though, Dallas. You're a strapping young fella, a lot of life ahead of you. But the you spend so many years shooting guns and handling weapons, and like it just becomes like a second nature thing, especially guns. Like gun for me, I'm way more comfortable with a gun than I am with a bow, just because I don't think a lot when I'm about to shoot. Like it just happens, and that's what I want to get myself to that level with a bow. I've always shot bows, but have not put enough rounds in to just feel that, not second guessing yourself and wondering where that shot's going to land. With a gun, it's just, especially in the last few years, it's just been like, just look at what you want to hit, and it's the bullets landing there. But anyway, like what I'm trying to say is that, I can speak for Jimmy and I. Dad would give us a box of Remington 22 ammo, one of those old canisters, the 500 round just boxes you get at Walmart. And Jimmy and I would sit there and we would just plink away for hours on end up at camp. That's what we did when we were 10, 12 years old. And that's something that that's a necessary, thing to learn how to pull the trigger and to learn how to go through the whole process of shooting and just getting comfortable with a firearm. Where you take somebody like AJ who's getting into it, and there's a ton of people out there like AJ that are getting into hunting in their 30s without having grown up around guns or around bows. And it's like, they're going and buying a rifle or buying a shotgun. AJ had, I think he was telling Brian he maybe only shot a couple rounds through that gun of his. The only shot he'd ever taken with that 12 gauge that he shot at the turkey with on Sunday, he shot a raccoon last year. That's the only thing that he's shot. Not even a target. So it makes you think about, like, you got to get out there, whether it be shooting clay pigeons or shooting just a stationary target with a shotgun or with a rifle. Like, you got to build that comfort around the weapon before you can even feel super confident about going out and killing with it. I mean, it's just such a necessary thing. But what was, like, you and Brian, were you guys always shooting something growing up, or?
Yeah, Brian even more than me. But yeah, we always had guns. I mean, my big thing was, when I was a kid, I mean, we grew up on a dairy farm, and I worked all day, every day. But, in the summer, if we weren't doing, like, if we didn't have a major project going, we'd have breaks. So, you'd do 2-3 hours of work in the morning, and then you might have an hour or two free. Well, all summer, I'd have a fishing rod and a tackle box sitting right out there by the pond that's right in the barnyard. And I'd hammer bass. I mean, I could catch 5-6 largemouth bass and throw them back in between doing chores, and then when chores were done in the evening at 7-8 o'clock, I'd grab my 22 and I'd go out and I'd woodchuck hunt I just walk out the barnyard in the back and just start planking woodchucks. And I tell you, I missed a lot of woodchucks.
Yeah.
I learned a lot of lessons about shooting just from, I got so frustrated. I almost threw my gun away one time that I missed so many woodchucks, but I got all that shit out of the way when I was a kid, I learned those lessons, and I learned how to do things the right way, so that put me on a fast track to success by just doing all that stuff, just by myself as a kid, just learning how to fail and learning how to succeed. I mean, that started a long time ago for me. One of my regrets is I lived in Rochester until I was almost 30, and I wasted my whole 20s as far as the outdoors because I was a weekend warrior. It sucked. I knew I didn't like it, but that's where my life was. That's where my career was. But I had to drive an hour back here to mom and dad's house to get, that's where all my gear was. That's where my hunting property was, all this stuff. I wasted 12 good years of those experiences. And so I've only really turned it on again since I've really been in my 30s.
Yeah.
And I was having kids the whole time too. So I was been battling that, but just being around this area and having access to everything that I need and just being able to go in my basement and grab my gun or my bow and go outside and shoot or go hunting or whatever. It's just been it's been such an advantage for me now. I wish I always had that, but that's just the way that, sometimes it's just the way life takes you,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think so many people can relate with that because there's a period, everybody's 20s go a little bit differently. Either you're single and you're just living the dream and you're just out and about, tearing it up, hunting, fishing, becoming the best that you can be with that stuff. If we're just talking about hunting in the outdoors, or you are, you're career focused and you're doing all these things and maybe you're settling down and you just don't have the time for a lot of those things. And then you get into having kids and, that's a huge game changer in a time, it's a incredible time, but you don't have the time that you had, and you can always reflect back to those years, in your 20s when it's like, Jesus, what an idiot. Like, why was I not spending that extra time I had instead of, partying or doing whatever, chasing girls, like, man, I could have really done something if I had zero constraints and out tearing it up in the woods instead of tearing it up down at the local gin mill, like that's the reality of it. But, you can't take those days back, and there's a lot of great memories, and those were, formative years too,
Well, and there was a lot of weekend mornings where I didn't get out of bed and go deer hunting because my head was throbbing. But on a professional level, though, I mean, I spent those whole 20s getting, professional experience that's put me in the position where I am today, where the job I have today is a good job where I'm able to work full time, support my family, also have a lot of vacation where I can go and do these things that I want to now. So it definitely wasn't all for nothing.
Right.
It was all worth it. It's just that I wish I could have done that someplace in Wyoming County where I could have just been doing all the stuff that I am now, along with working 70 hours a week and traveling and all the other stuff that I used to do.
Right. Yeah.
One more point.
You look on that wall behind you, you should still feel good about all the bone you got. So don't worry about that. You're my idol, Dallas. You're my idol. Brian's wall is pretty impressive, but you got him beat. He does have that mule deer over you, though.
Yeah. I got 2 mule deer, but they don't add up. The 2 of them add up to like pretty much, probably the 2 of them together add up to a little bit over what the one that he shot was. Yeah. I just wanted to add one point to the fact that what you said before is right. And I hear this a lot, but it's besides being like when you're, getting accustomed to shooting and accustomed to your weapons and all that stuff. You're right. You got to go out there and shoot deer. Everybody wants to know, how do you kill a big buck? Where did you shoot that deer? How'd you get that big buck? How'd you scout him? How'd you find him? Well, all that's important, but if you're not accustomed to killing deer, if you're not used to pulling the trigger and putting deer on the ground and putting them in the freezer over and over and over again, you're going to fail more times than you're going to succeed when you have that chance at that big buck in front of you. You need to go through those formative years of, and yeah, you're going to be out there hunting. So maybe you will kill a big buck, but when you're learning, when you've only got a handful of deer under your belt, you got to be out there killing every tag you can fill. You should be filling it. That's how you're going to learn that when the moment of truth comes, when that big buck that you've been dreaming of comes by you and you have the opportunity to kill it, you need that experience to fall back on. That muscle memory, that repetition of pulling the trigger, whether it's an arrow or a gun or whatever, of being able to know how to kill that animal. And that's something that you realized a few years back and you started taking advantage of that more. But me and Brian and Dad have been telling people that for years and years and years. There's been plenty of times where, people are like, oh, you're so lucky you get all these big bucks and stuff. Yeah, well, I've shot a lot of forkhorns and I've shot a lot of does. I've shot does with a bow. I've shot does doing, how am I so good at killing deer on the run? It's because I've done it 100 times.
Right. Yeah.
I've sent slugs through deer, running across fields, through the woods, every situation you could imagine. I've killed deer, and without doing that, I wouldn't have the confidence that I do that when that buck that you're waiting on, you put your whole year into killing a mature buck. When you have that opportunity, it's very important to have that experience to fall back on.
Yeah, 100%. It all comes down to just confidence. That's the point I made on the podcast I was on the other day with Antler Up, is like, it's just confidence. Like, you have to build that confidence, and that goes to anything and everything. But like I watch you guys. You can tell, like, you and Brian and your dad, like, you can tell you guys are going back to the shooting portion of it. Like, you guys are so comfortable with whatever the weapon is. It doesn't even have to be your weapon. Like, just handling the gun and watching you guys shoot. You guys came up to my bachelor party, and all three of you guys showed up at the same time. We were already in the middle of our clay pigeon shoot, and you guys are like, "Oh, we didn't bring our guns," but or no, you guys brought your guns.
I brought mine, yeah.
Yeah, but you guys showed up.
I never shot it though, I don't think.
Yeah, you guys showed
I
up.
had a brand new 1187,
and you just stole the show, and everybody's like, who the fuck invited these guys? Like, what? Like, you didn't miss. And then your dad borrowed somebody else's bow and shot somebody else's bow with somebody else's release, and your dad shot great in the archery course. And it's like, it all goes back to it's just repetition. It's processing, and it's going through, and it's learning how to be effective with a weapon, how to use your sights, how to kill that animal. Like, it all just goes back to that. And I think that anybody who's listening to our show, and there's, we're talking and we're passionate about getting new people into the outdoors, and it's like, you got to take that time to build that repertoire and that skill set with the weapon, and build that experience putting those animals on the ground, because next thing you know, it just becomes second nature, and you just make it happen and get it done. So,
I'll tell you what, too, another advantage we have living in Western New York. I mean, say what you want about living in New York State, but it's a very target-rich environment, Western New York. I mean, that we have a lot of deer, we have a lot of turkey, we have all different kinds of small game. We have tons of places to fish. If that's all you want to do is fish, we've got streams, we've got the Finger Lakes, we've got the Great Lakes. I mean,
yeah,
there's a million things you can do in Western New York. And I mean, that's where, as far as deer hunting, that's a big part of killing all those deers, because we live where we do. We can get doe permits. People that live in the southern tier, and they can only get a permit every 2 years. Then when they get it, it's like gold. They're holding on to it. Like, well, I don't know if I want to shoot a doe today, or if I want to do it, next week, or I'm going to wait for a bigger one, or I want to do it. It's like, that's one thing we've never had to deal with, really, except for from when I was a kid. We weren't in that situation when I first started hunting, but now, man, we live in a great spot. If you want to kill deer and fill your freezer, come, man, Western New York.
Yeah.
It's a great place to do that.
100%. That's such a great point, because I listen to a lot of these, like the guys out west, talking about, you're getting one deer tag a year, and if you draw, like some of the residents, like they might draw every year or go for a no point draw if you're talking like Colorado or something, but you might only get a chance to shoot one animal a year and like have one opportunity. And the experience that us in an area like we are in, or you go down south, or even some other states, that have where you can shoot an abundance of animals, like those people are killers, because they kill a lot of deer, or a lot of anything, whatever it is that you're hunting. Like, you get to be more and more confident, and that's something to be said for that. It's a good point, Dallas, because especially around these areas, you get up here in Western New York, we have all this ag land. I mean, you can get 4 doe tags. Like, that's 4 deer right there, and that's not even your normal antlerless and antler tags. Like, so you can shoot. Like, I shot 8 deer this year, and I had a couple, whatever the farmers, whatever they get is at DMAPs, or so, like, I had a few DMAPs from Mike, and then I filled all my doe tags, and I shot a buck in PA, and I shot a buck here, and you start adding these deer up, and it's like, man, like, I didn't even fill all my tags. I had more tags I could have filled, but it's just,
sign overs too.
Yeah,
you can sign over your doe tags too.
Yeah,
legally.
right.
So
yeah, a lot of.
I mean, Western there's people out west that I've heard it a lot of times that say that, the Eastern hunters that come out west, they may not know that particular game, but man, we have a lot of experience hunting. We've hunted the big woods, we've hunted the swamps, we've hunted the ag land. We've had to work hard for deer in a lot of these places too, and so it allows us to be adaptable to go anywhere, and that's one of the things that I'm really proud of with our group is that we can go out west and kill mule deer or elk, and we can go down to the big woods and the hill country, in Pennsylvania and hunt those deer down there and be successful. And we can go down to the river bottom in Letchworth and drag deer out of there. And I know we're far from the only people that do it, but there's a lot of Western New Yorkers that are doing those kind of things that we're doing.
Yeah.
I'm so proud when we can go to these other places and have success,
Absolutely.
I just love it.
Yeah. There's not, we go and do some of that stuff, but there's not a lot of people, in the grand scheme of it. It's like, yeah, there's, we saw a bunch of cars there. There's a bunch of people that hunt in those areas, but it's like of the mass number of people that hunt, there's not that many people that are willing to go and do a lot of the things that we are. And, like Danny loves talking about quartering deer up and packing them out. Like I never, ever was subject to that. And then started hunting with you guys. And it's like right off the bat, it's like, yep, we're going to go down here, bring a backpack, and we're going to quarter these deer out and carry them out. And like it just changes the whole game. And we're not passing hardly anyone who's doing that, regardless of whether it's PA or New York. People aren't quartering game, and that gives you such a leg up over everybody else that you're trying to compete on those public grounds with, because you can go that much deeper and that much further with the confidence that you're gonna, that you can get that animal out without really any issue. Like just, you got a couple guys or even by yourself, just throw it in a bag and carry it out.
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest things that Eastern hunters are missing is the ability to quarter an animal and pack it out.
Yeah.
Just, I was even like the big woods guys, like up in the Northeast, big woods guys that are hunting, tracking those bucks and then dragging them out miles and miles and miles.
Jesus, I know.
Part of the reason they're doing that is because part of the trophy there is how big the animal is. So it's a big deal for them to get it out and weigh it. But I tell you what, I'd pack a scale in before I drag a deer out. I'll tell you that every day.
Take a picture,
I'll hang take a picture and hang a scale up from a tree and weigh it and then cut the thing up and backpack it home. Like I can't believe the stories I hear about the way they drag those. And the thing is, it's not like in Pennsylvania, we shoot a big buck and it might dress out 140 pounds, a 4-year-old buck. Up there, that's the whole trophy is trying to get a 200-pound buck, or I think in Maine they're going for 300-pounders, and then they're dragging them out so they can weigh them. And it's like, wow, I don't know.
No,
it seems like a bad idea to me.
Seems like a really bad idea. That's what, and Dad's got Dad and his brothers. They've got a lot of stories from our family bear hunts that I would like to. I got to get them on here. Dad and his brothers on to tell some stories, because they've got some hilarious stories, but they've got, some, like, I think they've shot, before my brother and I's time, or I guess Jimmy was up there pretty young when they shot a couple bears, but, they would game cart these things out, or they would, use a pole and string them up and carry them out. And it's like, what are you guys doing? It's like, you got 7 guys, like quarter that thing up, put it in game bags, and you're walking out with 15 pounds a piece or 10 pounds a piece. Like, not, I guess more than that probably, but you know what I'm saying? It's like it's nothing. You wouldn't have to be out there till midnight and sweating and, cursing and everything else trying to pull a card out. Like, game changer. But it's just a foreign world to people. You go out west, like that's just life. And around here, like that's just, what do you mean you got the deer in your backpack? It's definitely different. Added skill set. So we're touching an hour and a half, Dallas. Me and you we're a couple chatty Cathys on a Wednesday night. We could. So
we got sidetracked a little bit.
Yeah, no, but we covered the 3 main things I wanted to chat about with the the land, the scouting, and the cameras. And you and I have chatted. I want to kind of keep this thread going. Maybe like once a month, we try to continue kind of chatting. And I know we've all kind of gotten into the mobile hunting stuff. Me, you, and Brian are running some different things, and so I'd like to get us on to talk about that. At some point we get closer to season, but we'll definitely do another podcast maybe next month or something to talk about what we're seeing as far as bucks that are with all these cameras that are out. What are we seeing from deer that we found sheds of or that we know are still alive? Are we getting pictures of them and kind of follow the progression through the summer season and into deer season? So sound like a plan?
Yeah.
All right, man. You have a good night at work. I'm gonna go
Thanks.
to bed.
Go to bed for now. You could be on your way to the hospital at any moment, though, huh?
I know. I probably shouldn't have just drank that coffee mug full of whiskey, but hopefully I'll sleep for a little while, and then my money's on we're gonna be a few more days. She's just not feeling it at all. So.
All right. Well, good luck with that.
Appreciate it, buddy. It's fun chatting
All
with
right.
you, and
Yep, you too.
keep feeding them.
Later.
See ya.